Hello, 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 and welcome to CorpusCast. Once again, I'm Robbie Love, your host, and this is the Aston University CorpusCast, all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. Welcome. Now, today our topic is not what corpus linguistics can do just for researching language, but what it can do for teaching language, something known as data-driven learning, or DDL. And my guest is Dr. Peter Crosthwaite, an expert in DDL and associate professor in the School of Languages and Cultures at the University of Queensland. So we're very grateful to him for joining us from Australia and navigating quite a big time difference between the UK and Australia. Peter's areas of research and supervisory expertise include corpus linguistics, of course, and the use of corpora for language learning, as well as computer-assisted language learning and English for general and specific academic purposes. Now, there are many accolades that I could mention. Out of those, I will mention that Peter has just taken over as the editor-in-chief for the Australian Review of Applied Linguistics and serves as associate editor for the Journal of English for Academic Purposes. So I'm very grateful to Peter for joining us today to discuss his research in data-driven learning. Let's find out all about corpus linguistics used for teaching language. So please welcome to CorpusCast, Peter Crosthwaite. Hello.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. It's a very nice introduction, and I hope that I'll live up to it during the session.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, and very much appreciate you being available in, I think, the evening over at your neck of the woods and early morning-ish for me here. So thank you very much. It's great to get the chance to speak with you. And we're going to start by asking a question that I always ask my guests to begin CorpusCasts, and that is, what does corpus linguistics mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess you've had lots of weird and wonderful answers.
Yes.
Yeah, at its simplest, it breaks down into linguistic data captured in electronic format, principled collections of this data that we can search, analyze, research, and use for teaching, particularly in my case. It's just wonderful that we've got these digitized collections of language that we can consult, we can work with, we can document, we can save languages in this format. And it's a fantastic resource that has brought about so many different applications over the last, since the 1960s even. I'm very pleased to consider myself a corpus linguist, even though you still have to kind of explain to the man on the street, what is it you do when when you're on a train somewhere, someone says, what do you do? I'm a corpus linguist. So what's that? And then, we have to give them the same old story. These days, I just say it's like a primitive version of generative AI, and people kind of go, oh yeah, no, I get that. So I think that's it. But at the same time, people are now talking about language data, and people are discussing this seriously, and it's influencing policy and practice in all kinds of areas and businesses, and language data, and having access to these huge data sets now is big money. It's big industry. It's a $1 billion industry. It's forming around the world, and at the essence of what these things are, they're corpora, and it's kind of like it's our time to shine.
I couldn't agree more, and I will actually go off script in a moment and ask you more about AI, because I know it's something that you've written about recently. But yeah. I want to ask more about how you came to be the person on the train who is explaining to people that they're the corpus linguist. When did what sparked your interest in language generally? Give us a little bit of your sort of your academic background and what led you to your current position.
Sure. Yeah, no, I started my career as a TESOL instructor. I worked in South Korea for a number of years. I did a master's in TESOL from London by distance, and then I came to Cambridge in 2009 to begin my studies in applied linguistics there. And I wasn't particularly interested in corpus linguistics at the time. I was mainly just involved in second language reference to person. But as part of my PhD project, and obviously being in Cambridge, I worked with a number of people who were involved on the Cambridge Learner Corpus and the English Profile Project, which aimed to document the language features of language learner production at different proficiency levels of the Common European Framework, so that they were analyzing that data to be able to quantify what some of the criterial features were for that. And it was an absolutely fascinating project that I did a small paper on using some of the data from that. And then through that experience, I built a corpus for my PhD, which was about second language reference to person, so another learner corpus. But I think my main break into corpus linguistics came after graduation. I took a position at the University of Hong Kong, the Center for Applied English Studies. I was working under Ken Hyland, who is one of the world's foremost researchers in English for academic purposes. And he's often credited with being one of the world's foremost corpus linguistic researchers as well. Although, kind of personal conversations with him, he never really considered himself like a corpus linguist as such. But he used corpora extensively to be able to do the kind of research that he'd done, like revealing insights into academic language. So at that time, I started to build longitudinal corpora, learner production, analyzing those, and basically took off from there. We got into English for general academic purposes, then into English for specific purposes. And then about a year into that, we then also started using corpora directly to teach English for academic purposes and building corpus activities into the disciplinary course content that students were studying at the time. And that's really how I got into DDL, data-driven learning.
And let's talk about that then. Our sort of main topic today, as we mentioned at the beginning, is data-driven learning or DDL. Let's start with the basics, and then we'll get onto the meaty stuff, right? So let's say you're on that train again, and somebody's just asked you, "Oh, what do you do?" "I'm a corpus linguist," and you've explained that, and then you say, "Oh, I specialize. One of the things I specialize in is data-driven learning." They go,
Yeah.
What on earth is that? Let's start with the basic definition, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think it's another thing that you do kind of have to explain to people. It's a phrase that sounds really cool, but when you kind of break it down into what it is, it's actually fairly simple. And it's using language data to learn, whether that's about language, or to learn language, or to learn something else. But you're using these collections, these corpora, to do some teaching and or learning. That's really what it breaks down to. The phrase was coined all the way back in the 1990s by Tim Johns. It's over the last kind of 30 years, it's become a substantial field with many hundreds of publications and empirical studies that have kind of tested that. Using language corpora in classroom context, out of class context, whether it's teacher-led or student-led, there's been so many studies now that have sought to show that its effectiveness. It boils down to there's kind of traditional views of data-driven learning and what they are. So using, say, concordancing software on corpora, and for a long time that was data-driven learning.
Yeah.
But these days, the concordances are really kind of taking second place to some of the other data output from various corpus tools that are being used in classroom settings, whether that's frequency information on collocates, collocation, chunks, increasingly visual information in the form of charts, diagrams that show some of the trends and patterns that are present in these data sets. And a great deal of learning is done by putting all of this information together in a constructivist language learning paradigm. That's That's how it works. You take all of the different sources of information and you arrive at conclusions to the problems that you set out to investigate. And that's the ideal. It's not specific to corpora necessarily. We're seeing lots of non-corpus applications involved in data-driven learning. So it's not just corpora, it's not just concordances. There's a great deal more to it than that. But at a very basic level, that's what data-driven learning is. It's consulting language corpora, going through concordances, searching for information, and discovering trends and patterns of language that are teachable from a teacher's perspective, and then highly learnable from a learner's perspective.
So it sounds like there's lots of different types of data-driven learning. And I was going to ask actually about whether it is something that is exclusive to corpus linguistics or can be a term that's applied in other areas of language as well. Because it seems that it's kind of talked about, maybe not exclusively, but mostly in the context of corpus linguistics. Are we talking just, purely about getting students to essentially be the corpus linguists themselves? It's like, I'm thinking about, in English, for instance, there's all of these corpus-informed textbooks that publishers have been, developing now for decades.
That's right.
And that is, of course, data-informed learning, maybe. Does that count as a type of DDL if it's just, using a textbook that has corpus data that's informing what it's saying, or are we really talking about the hands-on kind of practical work with teachers and students looking in corpora themselves and exploring the data with corpus tools?
Sure, I'd say that it's kind of difficult to draw a line like that. I mean, there's some traditionalists who say that that this is DDL, this is not DDL, and so on. But then I worked on textbook series and used corpora to derive materials for use in classroom context. So that might not look like corpus linguistics, it might not look like data-driven learning, but there's been a great deal of language data or corpus linguistics that have gone into the preparation of those materials. So yes, it's not kind of concordances listed in keyword in context mode that are being shown in textbooks, but then you're still using these corpora as resources to generate these teaching materials. So sometimes this has been called like indirect DDL, but it's still being termed as DDL because we're using the language data to generate those materials. In terms of the direct, which is the term you also use as well, but yeah, the view of direct data-driven learning is where the teacher is presenting corpus data to their students, and or the students are consulting corpora themselves using some kind of computer or electronic device, or they're given printed handouts of corpus data that they will be going through and looking for the things that they need to be learning.
And what is your research and others' research shown about the effectiveness of DDL and presenting students with an approach that they may not have encountered before? As you said, even though corpus linguistics has been around for quite some time now, it still feels like we're explaining ourselves for the first time to lots of people. What is the general sort of, maybe there's not a general approach, but are there any general patterns in terms of how students and teachers generally respond to adopting DDL?
Yeah, I think traditionally, but this is the case with a lot of computer-assisted language learning or even applied linguistics research generally, is that there have been a great number of kind of experimental studies and more qualitative studies that have shown that corpus consultation is highly effective for learning of a great number of linguistic areas, whether that's vocabulary acquisition, lexicogrammar, genre, awareness and knowledge, register variation, academic, general and specific discourse. So many studies have been published showing learning gains in all of these areas. However, a kind of well-known critique of DDL. As I said, it's not specific to DDL, but it's kind of a lot of applied linguistics research generally is that it's been most successful with advanced tertiary level learners who are learning quite specific things. So in terms of that broader appeal or work with learners of, say, lower proficiency levels, learners at the pre-tertiary level, there is now a relatively small but growing body of evidence that shows that in some cases it can be effective with those too. But then there are a number of caveats involved in terms of the corpora that you select, corpus tools that you integrate, and then the gap between a corpus linguist like myself leading the charge or equipping language teachers to be able to do that by themselves. So over the past 10 years at least, I think you've seen a lot more research moving away from like experimental studies of like, does DDL work? The field now is really looking at ways of how we can do DDL in classroom contexts in a way that is sustainable, in a way that's going to reduce some of the technical requirements involved, some of the cognitive difficulties involved with looking at concordances, for example. There are a great number of things that still need to be done and worked on. And I think one of the reasons why my work on DDL was recognized, there's so many great DDL researchers out there, but I think I was one of the first to, not one of the first, but one of the loudest, I guess, to try to move DDL beyond academic contexts and move it into more mainstream, like pre-tertiary, secondary, even primary level education. So I guess I hope I've answered your question there, but I'd say it definitely works, but it can be tricky. A number of steps you need to go through, number of things you need to consider, but this is true for any technical innovation. We're seeing this with generative AI right now as well, but computer-assisted language learning in general has to go through the same things, whether you're doing corpus-based DDL or whether you're using machine translation or another aspect of calls.
So from what you're saying, that the evidence is already well established that when it is used appropriately by people who have sufficient training, for instance, teachers who have sufficient training to be able to teach, it works. But the barrier to uptake is about the broader contextual factors around expert or the knowledge of the software and tools and access to data sets and things like that. I mean,
go ahead. As I say, it's not just any one thing, but a whole host of contextual factors. But things are getting better. I see in terms of tool development, for example, in terms of open access resources containing ready-made lesson plans. I've designed my own Corpus tool recently. I've designed training courses. I've designed online open educational resources to try to show people how it's done, and then they can follow my lead and the lead of that of others and try it out in their own context. And, we're seeing a lot of success, not just from the usual places, so Europe, North America, but there's so many DDL studies done in Asia, Southeast Asia, the global South now. It is really spreading quite rapidly in global DDL research that we're seeing.
Tell me about the tool that you designed. What's it called? What does it do?
So essentially, what I've designed is a tool called CorpusMate, which is like the most Australian name that I could possibly think of.
I love it.
We've got CorpusCast and CorpusMate.
Great.
So this tool was formed out of a DDL project I did with some secondary school girls here in Australia, where we gave them a number of tools to work with. They were learning about how to improve their use of the passive voice for science report writing, which is something they have to do for their year 12 exams here, and we gave them kind of 2 terms of DDL activities. They did some online tasks. They used various Corpus tools, and then at the end we saw, they had actually improved in their use of the passive. But then the feedback we got from a few months later on was that they kind of stopped using the tools, and that their critique of the tools that they were using was that they were not particularly user-friendly. The interface was tricky or clunky to work with. The data was kind of rigid in its structure. You couldn't really manipulate it or extend, get more information. There was not as much information. So what we tried to do was to take all of that feedback and turn that into a tool that would be useful for their specific needs going forward. So since the development of the tool, I made that tool with Vit Beiser, who worked on the Sketch Engine platform and produced the Sketch Engine for English language learning, which is the Scale platform. He's also co-designed the Versatext platform with James Thomas. So he's got a lot of experience, and the two of us got together to come up with this real pedagogical DDL tool, CorpusMate, which has been available for about 6 months now in its kind of initial state, and it's been used on teacher training courses already in Vietnam. It's used on my English for academic purposes courses that I run here at the University of Queensland as well. So it's got about maybe 60 million word corpus behind it. That corpus has been, we used some profanity filters on it to make it acceptable and appropriate for use with younger learners, and also in contexts where reference to, say, sexual language or drugs is prohibited. Like if we're working in Indonesia, for example, that's a big no-no. So we have that. There's a broad range of written and spoken data, and then it's divided up into 20 different subject area categories like school subjects, so English, geography, history, and so on. Pretty simple user interface, very Google-like, similar to the way that they're used to getting information from Google or other search engines. And it's fast, and it works pretty well so far. So the feedback has been positive, and there's a paper about the platform about to be published in the International Journal of Corpus Linguistics. And then myself and Lawrence Anthony of Fame are also writing a paper at the moment, kind of comparing the functionality of our respective tools and some of the methodological decisions that go into the design of Corpus tools. So that'll be something to look out for early next year.
Brilliant. That sounds really a great way of addressing some of the challenges that you've identified here. You mentioned this sort of was born out of several things, including that project with younger learners, and I do want to ask you about your work specifically with younger learners and DDL. Some might sort of argue that younger learners should be the most up for sort of adopting a new technology because that's kind of the way they've been brought up. But then others might argue that the specialist, techniques that are typically required to work with most Corpus tools would be, prohibitive for younger learners. So, where do you sort of sit? Maybe you've already answered the question in that. Well, the answer is make a tool that's easy to use, and then you sort of get the best of both worlds. So, is that kind of the direction you see things going in terms of promoting further DDL among younger learners?
Yeah, I find the learners themselves kind of take to things, and that they require minimal kind of training, I guess, or explicit instruction. And they're very good at kind of discovering things that we didn't ask them to discover, or trying things, making things work in a way that we didn't originally plan. So in all the times that I've done DDL with younger learners, I mean, I had a chapter in my book, 2019, we worked with 2 primary age learners, and they were using Skell, I think, and Lingual by Jason Chang, and they were doing things with those tools that we had no idea you could even do. So the learners themselves aren't the issue, but in order to keep them motivated and to keep them using the tool long term, that's a bit more of a challenge. So it really has to be integrated with what they're doing. And
True.
you've got to frame it in a way that it's not seen as the be all and end all of all of their issues that they're going to have. It's going to it's going to help them with some very specific issues that they might be having with language, primarily based around reading, vocabulary acquisition, especially in writing as well, in terms of drafting and response to teacher feedback on writing. So within some of these kind of authentic everyday tasks that they're doing, making sure that the corpus use is fully integrated and normalized within that practice is something that can be done, but it's tricky. But when it's done well, it really helps, and the feedback that you'll get from the learners is really very positive. Similarly for the teachers, the challenge of the teachers is quite different. Generally, the technical ability is there with the tools. After some brief training, they're able to see what the tool can do for their own work or their own language learning. But the most frequent complaint we get from language teacher trainees or in-service teachers is just the complexity involved in integrating corpus activities, like coming up, conceptualizing activities that use corpus in a meaningful way, or integrating it into assessment in some way, finding a space in the curricula where they can work with it. So it really takes applied linguists. I don't want to say applied linguists like myself. It's not like arrogant or so on, but certainly applied linguistics, maybe with a strong background in language teaching, who can see where a corpus activity might meaningfully be incorporated into, say, a 45-minute lesson plan. So we've just done a huge project with teacher trainees in Vietnam, looking at their integration of corpus activities into lesson plans following online training. We then analyzed the lesson plans to see evidence of corpus use and how feasible, or whether that activity would be something that would ideally lead to the kind of learning that the teachers had planned. And it's difficult to do, but with training on the pedagogical side of things, thinking about how to integrate corpus use within a lesson planning regimen, once they get to the habit of doing that and seeing the possibilities, then you really get buy-in from the teachers. And once you've got buy-in from the teachers, you then you've unlocked the door to get access to the students and buy-in from them as well. Something we've always found is that it's all fine. The applied linguist comes in and shows up with his fancy suit, all guns blazing. Here's everything here's a tool that's gonna change all of your lives. And it just doesn't work like that. Teachers probably see so many different kind of software and tools every day that they get exposed to. And even now with generative AI, just a large project over the past 8 months with teachers here in Queensland, and you'd be amazed like how many of them are over it already in terms of this is no good. I'm not going to need to change very much in what I do. I'm too busy to train and too busy to learn about how to do it. I'm too busy to integrate it into what I'm doing. So corpus linguistics, if you're not careful, can just be another one of these things that just gets left on the shelf. But I find that certainly in the experiments and the training with people that I work with, the results have been quite promising. But we're not blind. We're not blind to some of the challenges involved in that. And I think the field as a whole is still very much working out how to overcome these challenges. But certainly the papers I've been reading over the past 5-10 years, I think we're doing very well in that regard, but there's still a lot more work left to do.
Speaking of integration, do you see, a space for explicit corpus instruction, DDL, in, language learning apps like Duolingo, if they don't already? I don't actually know, but...
Yeah, so that's something that can certainly be the case. One thing that I've done, which I've just put into the chat, I'm not sure whether you can look at that now or whether that's something that you can show the viewers later, but we have developed kind of open educational resources which contain lesson plans that contain a DDL element. So, and these are produced by...
I think Sam should be able to share
That's
that.
great.
Okay, I'm putting on the spot. We'll see if it appears and we'll know he's been able to. But yeah, go ahead.
I should have also linked the CorpusMate link as well when I discuss that, but maybe you can edit that back in later.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but yeah, certainly with this book, this was developed by partners in Brazil. So they work in the Brazilian teaching context, and we put together this open access resource called Using Language Data to Learn About Language. This is a teacher's guide to classroom corpus use. So what was good about this is that instead of us developing lesson plans and getting teachers to teach them, what we did in this case was we got the teachers to sit down and have a think about how they might develop a plan involving at least one or a number of corpus activities to help consolidate some of the some of the other activities that are going on in the lesson plan. So this is done from the perspective of a complete plan. Most of the lessons take about 45 minutes to 2 hours to complete. There's plans pitched at different proficiency levels, and we've also divided them up into hands-on and hands-off activities. So hands-on activities are ones that are done where students have access to a device that will allow them to consult the corpus, or hands-off is where the teacher has access to the data, and the students then will be following the teacher's lead in that. So again, having it within the context of a full, complete lesson plan is really important. So it's not just a list of corpus activities and that's the plan. It is actually embedded into a meaningful, structured plan with a proper introduction, warm-up activities. Then we get on to the language features, and then there's some kind of consolidation activity at the end and opportunities for feedback. So 15 lessons there. So some are for English, some are for Spanish and Portuguese as well. There's a number of these guides now, not just our guide, but a number that have become available recently. So I think the more these kind of guides we see, it's really helpful for other people who are wanting to do something similar in their context. And then that's how these things get started.
Thank you for sharing that. For those who've been watching on the video, of course, you will have seen we were scrolling through, looking at some of those activities. I love some of the names. Is This Love was a favorite of mine, involving searching for the word.
There at that point with a photo.
Yes, that'd be great.
Multiple choice answer. Is this love? Yes, no, not.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. That's about the best intellectual contribution I could ever make to this. Absolutely. As we start to wrap up, you've mentioned AI a few times, and of course the elephant in the room, not only in DDL.
So.
Exactly.
Essentially, and the way I've referred to generative AI is also in some writings has been it's essentially just corpus linguistics on steroids, right? It's the Arnold Schwarzenegger of corpus linguistics.
It's true. I mean, similarly, I've been teaching my undergraduate corpus linguistics module this past term, and it has helped. It's another way of, among other things, of course, we'll get onto, but it is another way of helping to explain what corpus linguistics is, because you say these ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. It is a much based on a much more sophisticated version of essentially corpus linguistics. And that's been great.
Going back to that man on the train analogy, it's been great being able to explain the work that I do and I've done for the past 10 years. As you say, what's a corpus linguist? Generative AI? Yeah, it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
it helps out.
And we're going to go very meta here, because you recently published a paper, I think, in Applied Corpus Linguistics, discussing things, ChatGPT and generative AI, and what does it mean for not specifically DDL, but corpus linguistics more broadly. And I think there are maybe a few other papers in there as well. I recently read one from a previous CorpusCast guest, Phoebe Lynn, who was experimenting with using ChatGPT as a concordancer to produce examples that are authentic, like they're not, they read authentic.
Very well. Yeah, Phoebe's work was came out, I think, 2 days after mine. And it was a really good piece, and I took the prompts that are in that paper and tested it myself. Yep, it works fantastically. So really very useful. And I guess that paper was really more of a kind of a response that I think had to come out pretty quickly in terms of people saying, well, you're not going to need Corpora anymore. You're not going to need to do DDL. That field's done. We've all got generative AI now. So we can just type in what we want and we'll get what we want instead of having to type in a query term and go through concordances and frequency lists and that kind of thing. But in terms of how generative AI compared with Corpora for DDL is that the plan is if you combine the use of generative AI to do some of the tasks involved in some of the language areas that you're trying to learn, it will do that very well. But then if you're dealing with something more specific, or you need to be able to verify the results that you're getting, you need to be able to verify the data, where it was drawn from, you need to be able to back up some of the claims that you're making about some of the things that you're saying about language, then corpus linguistics still very much has a place there. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I remember I was blown away when ChatGPT, the GPT-3 came out. This was before ChatGPT, so when it was just the API with the playground, that blew me away. And then ChatGPT came out. But now version 3 is pretty much unusable. 3.5 really very rarely does what you need it to do. And I'm having even major trouble with 4 at the moment in terms of getting that to do certain things. So I think there's a bit of a random element built into it as well, which will then really limit some of the classroom applications that you can do. I've got a master's student. We just submitted a paper to Journal of Second Language Writing on this. It's not corpus related, but where they were using generative AI to provide written corrective feedback on a number of student texts. But the problem was it would not give you the same kind of feedback every time. It would give you like 5 or 6 different types of written corrective feedback, even using the same prompt on the same text. Whereas humans all kind of tend to give written corrective feedback in the same way. They give a bit of direct feedback, they give a bit of indirect feedback in the form of some comments, maybe some notes at the end of the text. There's some individual variation, but we tend to give it in a kind of uniform manner. Generative AI at the moment just doesn't have the ability to do that. So for those kind of pedagogical tasks, it's really not suitable yet. And I guess it's the same for corporate data-driven learning. There are some things that generative AI cannot do, or that you need to be able to verify how it's done it, and you can't. And that means there is still a place for corporate for the foreseeable future. But then we know that corpus linguistics, the DDL, they got this kind of credibility crisis, I guess, as in terms of mass appeal, funding, the amount of people who, if you go to the man on the street, you ask him what ChatGPT is, you'd be able to get an answer. So corpus linguistics itself really needs to kind of have a big look at itself in terms of how we present what we do to others, the way that we try to bring others into the field. The field's got quite silly in terms of, say, quantitative skills, knowledge that are needed to be able to publish even some of the most basic things these days. So the tools are still completely opaque, even to experts like myself who, try doing something in R and then you need to upgrade it the next week and then suddenly all your libraries don't work. I mean, you're not going to get people on board with this kind of thing. So I think we as a field also need to have a look at how we do that. And fortunately, you've got people like Lawrence Anthony who are now looking at embedding large language models into NComp, for example. And that is just, I think when that works, that's really going to change things for a lot of us. You start to see that copied by other major players like Lanxbox or Sketch Engine. I think then the sky really is the limit in what the field can do and how we can evolve and bring more people to corpus linguistics as a whole, not just DDL, but bring more people into what we do in some of these approaches.
And that has to be
to the market.
That has to be inevitable, in terms of the integration of this sort of technology in, well, everything, not just in corpus linguistics, but corpus tools as well. I want to finish by asking you just one quick question. I normally ask three, but you've already touched upon a couple of them in the last few moments anyway. So I'm going to ask you just one of my quick questions to finish. And this is the question asking, what is your number one piece of advice for students who are embarking on corpus research?
It's a great question. I guess my answer would be to think very carefully about what it is that you are looking for. What is your research question? And everything will stem from that in terms of the corpus that you decide to use, the tool that you use, the data, the way that you look at and analyze the data, some of the statistical processes that you're going to use on the data, the way that you're going to interpret all that just stems from the research question. And I guess try to also make a research question that is just fun and important for you, something that you've always wanted to know yourself, something that you've always had in the back of the mind. You thought, well, I wonder how that works, or I wonder why people say that and not that, or do these people say that and not that? And sometimes the more kind of random or the more off the wall kind of research question that you come up with, I find that they often make the best kind of master's students thesis, the best PhD thesis someday. So you just woke up and you went, I wonder how that works. I wonder how we can find that out. And for me, that can be the best kind of research for students who want to break into corpus research and to make it interesting and fun and relevant to them. And at the same time, they develop the skills involved in being able to select and curate and analyze language data, corpus data, to be able to draw meaningful conclusions from it.
I think that is great advice. I couldn't agree more that, curiosity should certainly act as a great motivator. Certainly, it's informed some of my research in sort of slightly wacky areas and swearing, things like that as well. So I certainly identify with that. Peter, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to chat with you and hear more about your research in data-driven learning and your musings on some other topics like AI as well and thinking ahead to the future. We will draw things to a close there. So thank you to all of our listeners, as always, for listening to CorpusCast on your platform of choice, be that YouTube or Spotify, wherever it is you get your podcasts. Do let us know your thoughts using the hashtag CorpusCast, and make sure to check out the Aston Corpus Linguistics Research Group on X at Aston Corpus, and you can follow me at Lovermob. CorpusCast is an Aston Originals podcast hosted by me, Robbie Love, and produced by my colleague Sam Cook. So thanks again to our listeners. Thank you again, Peter Crosthwaite. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for joining us on CorpusCast.
Thanks for having me on the show, and I look forward to seeing the podcast go out and look forward to seeing who's on next.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.